Hello, good morning, guys. Welcome to the first session. Today, we're going to study about Enlightenment and its major ideas. We're going to study about Kant and Rousseau, the spread of Enlightenment, the colonies, and the spread of socialism in Europe in the beginning of the modern period. This is going to be the first session, so there are going to be changes further down the line, but for now we're going to follow the schedule. All right, I am going to cover one unit every day, so we will be done with the optional syllabus of history before the new year. On the new year, rather, we will have completed everything there is to learn. All right, so let's start with enlightenment first. So enlightenment, let's just increase the thickness a bit. So enlightenment, when you're studying history, we are going to study from the perspective of writing answers. We're not going to study from the perspective of anything else. So when you're writing any answer on enlightenment that is even broadly related, you can cite Roy Porter. In your first answer, you can say that it's a set of ideas and attitudes which encouraged people to do three things. What are those three things? We need to learn to question authority, to think for themselves, and embrace further three things: knowledge, freedom, and improvement. This is a broad definition of enlightenment. You can use this in multiple places, but we're not going to be following this specific framework because this is very long. You have to write around a lot of words, and this is, in an introduction, it's not like perfectly suited, but just to know, you can use this. Or you can use another example. Kant has said that it's enlightenment is release from self incurred tutelage. This you can use also in the definition of enlightenment. All right. Now, what was the background of the enlightenment? You need to understand. The enlightenment was caused in a backdrop of three things. The first was the Catholic Counter Reformation. So, Counter Reformation was basically when, after Martin Luther's Reformation, the Catholic Church was trying to improve its standing among the population, which essentially meant that it was trying to encourage ideas that had hitherto been discarded by the church due to religious dictates. And the second background was Rene Descartes, who gave the rationalist philosophy. So, rationalism was a very important part of the uh, process of enlightenment, which essentially led to the growth of many new ideas and the cultivation of a scientific spirit and that sort of thing. The third thing was the scientific revolution. The scientific revolution is when many new scientific inventions were made, and it was said that just like philosophy as a field was similar to science, and it was said that both philosophy and science are dictated by natural universal laws which do not change over time. So this is the background in which the Reformation began. you can understand how it culminated by reading the texts, or by the very uh, exposition of the ideas of the Enlightenment are contained in John Locke's essay on human understanding. Alright, this is very important. You can cite this wherever you want. He postulated the, if which said the tabula rasa, or the blank slate theory. Blank slate is when a human is born. When a human is born, he is completely devoid of any ideas of himself or herself, of itself, and hence every individual should be given the three basic rights, which are life, liberty, and property, as well as new ideas that were emerging at the time, such as a social contract. So it was said that these are the entitlements of anyone born as a human during this period. Now, what are the major ideas of the Enlightenment? So Enlightenment is basically in the field of ideas. So what were the ideas, and how did they impact the time and the institutions of that time? We have to understand. The first is reason. So it was said that everything is dictated by reason, and the absence of blind faith, which went against the dictates of the church. Absence of blind faith of church. And then you have to be constantly questioning of everything that is happening around you. So saper ode was a dictate of given by Kant, which was essentially dare to know. This is the second idea of the Enlightenment. The third is the secularization of political institutions. So political institutions had been controlled by the kings, and was essentially run by the churches, which had an outsized political influence, which prevented the proper uh, implementation of the popular will, which was violative of the social contract, and hence secularization of political institutions was done. Individual liberty was prioritized over absolute authority. This is the third thing. So absolute monarchy was violated, or rather abolished, or rather militated against, by concerns over individual liberty. You have to remember that point, because that is something that can be asked in multiple different ways. The fifth point is natural law. So as we had seen earlier, that due to the scientific revolution, there came a theory that philosophy is similar to science, which is dictated by natural universal laws, and hence natural law theory came into being, which essentially said that there should be the civil laws should be based on civil laws should be denominated under natural universal laws. Then the next is egalitarianism, which said that all men are born equal, which is another different concept, which is another radical concept, because it militated against feudalism of the times. Then further, another concept was humanism. Humanism, which was against then principles of like discriminatory action and all of that. Individual liberty, we have already talked about individualism. So there was also optimism for human progress. This is another important thing that you have to remember: optimism for human progress. So everyone who's participating in the political field, there was a greater acceptance of the theory that the human species is essentially, it is tabula rasa. So there's a blank slate, and hence by civil laws which provide a framework, we can use individual liberty to dare to know more things and cause human progress. All right, that's the basic fundamental theory, which is that there's a blank slate, so we can use civil laws for liberty, questioning application of reason for human progress. So this is all there is to know about the various ideas of the Enlightenment. So if any question comes, so there are questions: what was enlightened about the age of Enlightenment, or explain the major ideas of the Enlightenment, this is what you have to write. Now we're going to see another part of this. So how was this implemented and in what fields? So reformative ideas of the Enlightenment are very important, because you can actually explain, like with examples, how these ideas affected the world of the time. So in fields of economy, you can say that free market and capitalism grew during this time through Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations. All right, then you have law Cesare Beccaria, who gave the book or text on crimes and punishments. Then you got ethics. So this is just basically Kant and all his ideas. You got religion. So there's a message of tolerance spreading around, which was explained by Voltaire's treatise on tolerance. And then finally, there's society. So in society, you got new ideas around equality of women, which was exemplified by Rousseau and Olympe de Gaulle. I don't know how to pronounce this, but that's fine. You have to write it, you don't have to pronounce it. Declaration of Rights of Women and Female Citizen. So we have understood what is the definition of enlightenment, what's the background of enlightenment, what are the major ideas of the enlightenment, and what are the reformative ideas as exemplified by various thinkers of the time. Now, what we are going to study is what is the different aspects. So, what is was it a continuation of the scientific revolution, and in which ways was it not? So, scientific revolution continued in the Enlightenment because of, we've already read this, rationalism, naturalism, optimism for human progress, and humanism. You can cite the example of Francis Bacon, who gave the inductive method to gain new knowledge. So this is how it was a continuation of the scientific revolution, but there was also many ways in which it was not a scientific revolution, like the ideas of individualism, relativism. Those were not scientific revolution related. These were general ideas that grew out of a general sense of what was happening around the world. Right. The ideas of the Enlightenment undermined the authority of the monarchy and the church and paved the way for political revolution. So, what was the consequences? Political revolutions of 18th and 19th centuries. All right. We are done with the first part. There are a few elements left. So let's go through them. What are the dimensions of enlightenment? All right. The first, we are also going to talk here about the various historiographical examples. All right, in order to properly understand what's actually happening here. So we're going to talk about scientific revolution, search for universal principles. Universal principles like the Principia Mathematica of Newton, and who was the progenitor of its historiographical analysis? It was Dorinda Outram, right? So that you can write it whenever you want to cite it in an actual answer. There was humanism. So autonomy over authority. This was Erasmus, and this was pointed out by, who was it? It was Peter Gay. You can cite, the only reason I'm writing all this is so that you can cite these examples in your answers. And there was religious skepticism. skepticism and secularism of Voltaire. And who wrote it? Who wrote about it? It was Jonathan Israel. Jonathan Israel. Then we have political upheaval and social contract. It was given by John Locke. Now you must be able to remember and write all of these things without actually like looking at them all over again. So you're talking about ideas of the scientific revolution, Newton Principia Mathematica, the Render Outram. Then we're talking about humanism. So Erasmus. Then who said about it? It was Peter Gay. Then we're talking about the religious skepticism and secularism, Voltaire. You can also possibly, if you want, if you feel lucky, then you can also write about Baruch Spinoza here, and it was said by Jonathan Israel. And then finally we're talking about the political upheaval and the social contract given by John Locke, who gave the two treaties of government, right? And then we're also going to talk about economic changes and the rise of a bourgeois desire for freedom and personal agency. So, economic freedom, as we have already studied from Adam Smith about the wealth of nations. So, economic freedom is also an important idea that was propagated during the period of the Enlightenment, bourgeois, that essentially financed the Industrial Revolution, and the historiographical theory of this case was given by Robert Danton. Then we're also going to talk about public sphere and print culture. Public sphere and print culture. So public sphere and print culture essentially means that whenever there's an idea, due to the absence of the printing press, it was not being able to spread among many areas. So what happened is, after the printing press came along, the same idea could be replicated and sent to multiple places at the same time. It essentially created a new field of ideas that revolved around the printing press. So this created a public sphere. With, you can cite the example of Denis Diderot's encyclopedia. All right, encyclopedia. The theory around the case, the historiographical theory of the case, was given by Jürgen Habermas. And then the final dimension of the Enlightenment was the modern thought and its development. Modern thought and its development. So reasoning was developed as a concept by the likes of Immanuel Kant, with the historiographical theory of the case being given by Ernst Cassier. So these are all the dimensions of the Enlightenment that you can cite in any answer that you write about the topic. Now we've covered a lot. What we're now going to talk about is what was the impact of the Enlightenment really. Because it's important to understand that the Enlightenment was not a process in a vacuum. It existed in a social context, and it had social repercussions. So it essentially led to an awakening of the people. So the people were more aware of the world they were inhabiting and what they were doing within that world. So it awakened the people. So social structures were destabilized, like the clergy and other nobility and other feudal classes. The social structures became destabilized. Then we are also going to talk about how, so there was greater demand for reforms among the people. So there was arguments for liberty and other important values. There was also a period of enlightened despotism. We are going to study this in detail later about how the calls for enlightened despotism were very rapid and very important in how they existed in society. And there was a concept of revolutions. In order to achieve these demands for liberty, there was revolutions. So we understand, and we are going to study about the American, the French, and other revolutions during the duration of our course, which were largely caused by the Enlightenment and its various ideas itself. We're also going to see that the Enlightenment caused a scientific outburst. So there was a lot of new things that were created, whether it be in James Watt or Lavoisier and his other ideas. We're also going to talk about how economy and sociology. We've already read about Adam Smith and Cesare Beccaria. So on crimes and punishments by Beccaria, on crimes and punishments by Beccaria, and Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. So this is done. Now, what was the other consequence? It also triggered the movement of Romanticism. So, Romanticism as a cultural movement began due to the impact of the uh, Enlightenment. So, having read Enlightenment, we also have to study what enlightened despotism is. This is a theory that this is not a theory, this is a social reality that occurred during this period in which absolute rulers absolute rulers implemented enlightenment reforms while maintaining centralized power. This is a theory, this is a historical definition given by Peter Gay. No, let's do something. All the historian's name we're going to write in white so that it's easy to identify the historiographical realities. All right, Peter Gay. Now, what was the enlightened despotism movement all about? So, the enlightened despotism was basically the idea that royal power was derived not from divine right but a social contract. So, the primacy of social contract is important, which was a concept again given by John Locke. Social contract is what is important when you're talking about enlightened despotism. So Lord Acton, you can again like cite this. No, this is not action, this is TON. All right, Lord Acton called it repentance of the monarchy. Alright, repentance of the monarchy. Lord Acton called it the repentance of the monarchy. We're going to see various examples of how people and various rulers executed their reforms. So first we're going to read about Catherine II of Russia. Now, Catherine II of Russia implemented many reforms. So she implemented a permanent council of states. She made it um, necessary to implement local government reforms. She implemented new nakaz, which was a law for like codification of law, and she also implemented judicial reforms, and she also implemented education reforms. So she found the Smolny Institute, which implemented education reforms. But it has to be remembered there was these reforms were not absolute. So serfdom existed and the status quo was maintained. Status quo was maintained. Now again, this is a historiographical analysis, so you can cite this wherever you want in your answer. This is said by Stephen Lee. All right. Now we are also going to see about Frederick II of Prussia. Frederick II of Prussia. Now Frederick II of Prussia also implemented many reforms. So there was a criminal justice law, there was a toleration edict, and there was also a civil code called Land Act. You can cite those. So you can cite all of these. I'm making sure that I'm only including things that are proper nouns. So all of these can be cited wherever you want in the answer sheet. So Maria Theresa and Joseph II were from the Holy Roman Empire, who also were prolific in their implementation of reforms. So the first is abolition of titles. Then abolition of feudal courts and the death penalty. These were all abolished. So titles, feudal courts and death penalty were all abolished. Now don't write that they implemented these. They abolished these, and they implemented a secular curriculum, and they tried to do many things, but they were not very successful. So a historiographical analysis can be said that Stuart Andrews said that Joseph II was Enlightenment's ablest pupil and most spectacular failure. All right, you can cite this. So we have two examples, no, we don't have two. We have three historiographical analysis yet. We have Peter Gay, who gave the definition. We have Stephen Lee, who said that the status quo was maintained. And then we have Stuart Andrews, who called Joseph II the ablest pupil and the most spectacular failure. Now, there were also other rulers that tried to implement reforms. So there was Charles III of Spain. Right, Charles III of Spain was also very important in that he implemented tax reforms. He reduced the power of the church, and also he established the Royal Spanish Academy. This is also important. There's also another guy who was also very influential, and it's not generally mentioned because he is not from a country that's considered very European in the sense of the term, but Sultan Semis III. Sultan Semis, I'm sorry, that's not Semis, it's Selim. Sultan Selim III of the Ottoman Empire was also prolific. He established the Nizam-e-Sidid military units and the reduction of corruption was implemented. Now, we also have to see that the Enlightenment failed in many areas. So, what were the various examples where the Enlightenment failed? The first is, we are going to read this later as well, Louis XVI. Louis XVI failed primarily because his finance ministers, Turgot and Necker, were ignored when they wanted him to implement financial reforms that would have essentially prevented the causes of the French Revolution. Then there was Frederick William II, again of the Prussian Empire. So Frederick of Prussia was Frederick William II. He was a conservative guy, so he did not want any reforms. He rolled back many reforms, and he relied on nobility for implementing his autocratic agenda. Then there was Tsar Paul II of Russia, who was the son of Catherine II, and he was also autocratic and implemented harsh laws. And finally, another failure of the Enlightened despotism movement was Gustav III of Sweden. Gustav III of Sweden, who started off as an enlightened despot but became autocratic over time. Alright, so these are the various examples of the enlightened despotism movement, but it's not all, because you also have to remember that there's a historiographical analysis of that entire movement. So it failed. Now, remember, I'm only citing historiographical analysis here. So it did not fundamentally change absolutist rule. So absolutist rule remained. It remained in place, and hence M.S. Anderson said there was nothing new. Rulers failed to accept that they should be directed by the people, which essentially strengthened monarchical absolutism. So Stephen Lee, again, these are all historiographical analysis you can cite. So Stephen Lee said that it was a marriage of convenience. It was a marriage of convenience, as the monarchies wanted security and nothing else. It was a marriage of convenience, and there was extreme dependence on a single person who worked without taking into consideration the beliefs and the prejudices of the people. Perry Anderson said that it was surface modernity and subterranean archaism. Surface modernity and subterranean archaism. Finally, there was the difference between enlightenment of the ruler and that of his regime. So Christopher Hill said that it did not change, no change in feudal substructure of society. Now let's recap all the historiographical analysis we have read. So Peter Gay gave the first example, first definition of what enlightenment is, then what enlightened despotism is, and then we saw that Stephen Lee said the status quo was maintained. Then we have Stuart Andrews calling Joseph II the ablest pupil and the most spectacular failure. Then you have M.S. Anderson. Then you have again Stephen Lee. Then you have Perry Anderson. And then you have Christopher Hill. So you have to remember all of these. So that any question comes from this topic, you can write an answer around it. Now, what's the conclusion? If any question comes on the topic, what's the conclusion that you can write? The conclusion that you can write is it eroded in 1790s when the French Revolution began, and the French Revolution began, which overthrew the old monarchies of Europe. This is the entire scope of the Enlightenment thing. All right, we're done with this. Now we are going to study about Rousseau and his ideas on the Enlightenment, which is also a pretty important topic because Rousseau is one of the most important thinkers of the Enlightenment, and we're going to study about what his ideas were. So Enlightenment, the colonies and socialist ideas. Yes, all right. We can do this. It's going to take a while, but we'll finish this topic today no matter what. And then we'll see if we'll do Rousseau and Kant, and then we'll see if we'll do the other two topics that are left behind. I think we can do another topic, even if socialism will leave for another day. We can do another topic, that much I'm sure of. All right, so let's talk about major ideas of the Enlightenment. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. I'm sorry, we need another pen. So we're gonna study about Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Now, what was the major idea behind Rousseau? Again, when we're writing, we need an introduction. So, what we're going to do is we're going to write a we are going to write a historiographical introduction, which essentially says that Rousseau was the first and greatest critic of modern society and an architect of modern democratic state. And who said this? This was Peter Gay. All right. Now we can also cite another definition of Rousseau. We can say that he was a 18th century philosopher who was the torch bearer of Romanticism and founder of counter Enlightenment. This was said by William Everdell. All right. These two names you have to remember because you have to cite these wherever you define what Rousseau stood for. Now, let's see what were his major ideas. Rousseau was a man. So the first point you have to remember about Rousseau is that he was a man who preferred the heart over the head. So that was his major ideas. So he preferred the heart of the masses over the head of the autocrats who believed that they knew what was right and what was wrong. He also gave a critique of science and technology. Because the scientific revolution was apace, he gave a critique of of materialism and critique of science and technology and materialism in his work Discourse on Science and Arts. Discourse on Science and Arts. So this is important, in which he said that science causes Discourse on Science and Arts, he said that science causes corruption of virtue and morality. Corruption of virtue and morality. This is an important idea behind what Rousseau stand for, because he was one of the first people who argued against the scientific revolution rather than in favor of it. And he also gave a critique of reason. So he was against, so as the torchbearer of romanticism, he also gave a critique of reason, because he said that reason is not always right, you have to follow your heart. This he did in Discourse on Origin of Inequality. And he said that civilization's rational progress was not progress as it was achieved. Again, the same argument stands, which said that it was against morality. So morality is being violated here. So the first idea of Rousseau was that he prefers the heart of the masses over the head of the autocrats. The second is that he gave a critique of materialism, science and technology, and the Discourse on Science and Arts, in which he said that it causes a corruption of virtue and morality. He also critiqued reason in his Discourse on the Origin of Inequality, and said that progress was achieved at the expense of morality, so morality was violated. He emphasized empathy rather than reason. He said that empathy over reason is important. Alright, he was against individual reason and said that good of all should trump individuals' interests. Good of all should trump individuals' interests. Now, this is basically the idea that the good of all, so this is basically the idea of general will. So, general will is what is the greatest good of the greatest number. So, what is good of all? So, there is a connection with Bentham's utilitarianism as well. Alright, so good of all. And then the further idea was, he distinguished between natural and artificial inequality, saying that private property was bad and unequal access to material resources resulted in exploitation and suffering of the common masses. So he said that private property was bad. Private property was bad, and inequality of materials causes suffering of common masses. So these are the ideas that he professes. Then we come to his major idea. So his major idea is social contract. Now this is something that Rousseau is known for. This is his very identity. Now you have to remember that Rousseau is not a person who's very, I don't know what to say. He's not very comfortable with the rule of autocrats. So he's saying that any rule should be a social contract, in which he emphasized the concept of popular sovereignty. So the sovereignty of the people, he said that it's paramount. and it is the sovereignty of the people that ultimately counts. If the ruler does not abide by the contract, if the ruler violates the contract, then it's cause for mass revolution, right? So a ruler who violates the social contract can be removed in a mass revolution. Then he gave another concept, which is we've already referred to it once, is the concept of general will. General will contains traces of every citizen's will but compromise for betterment of general public. Betterment of general public. It's however different from consensus will of all, as it is based on paternalistic notion of what is best for the people. So the people themselves do not have a say, but it can be said to them what they can and cannot do. So paternalistic rule is going to be implemented. Government can remove any particular will that did not conform to the general will. This led to a lot of bad activities, like Robespierre reign of terror is what it led to. So Robespierre's reign of terror was justified on the basis that there was a general will that implemented a paternalistic rule. So Robespierre's reign of terror was very good, it said. That's very wrong, because it's not supposed to be that way. The people do have a say. You can't say that it's based on paternalistic idea of what the people, what's in the best interest of the people. Government can remove any particular will that did not conform to the general will. This is Robespierre's reign of terror. More political parties means the general will is even more divided, and he hence preferred single party rule. So single party rule is very important according to his idea. He was opposed to, hence, if there's a single party, so he was opposed to representative democracy. So representative democracy as an idea did not appeal to him, and there was an incomplete, vague, and vulnerable to misuse. This was a very wrong idea, because it was, as we see in Robespierre's reign of terror, it was very much vulnerable to all sorts of misuse. Alright, it was vulnerable to all sorts of misuse. Now, his ideas can be compared with Hobbesian sovereignty, which said that people gave up individual liberty in exchange for common security through mutual transferring of right. C. E. Vaughan has said that Rousseau's sovereign, again, this is historiographical analysis, this is something picked up from a previous year question. So C. E. Vaughan has said that Rousseau's sovereign was like Hobbes's Leviathan with its head chopped off. Alright, it's Rousseau's sovereign was like Hobbes's Leviathan with its head chopped off. That you can write it if you want to. So when you're trying to explain the concept of the social contract, this was because there was no single person was a sovereign. General will was developed through participatory democracy, was a source of all laws, and it always aimed at promoting general interests and will of all of its members. He gave his theory of social contract, in which he rejected pure democracy and said that if there was a nation of gods, it would govern itself democratically. A government so perfect is not suited to men. His political theory includes three components. So Rousseau and his theory contain three components. The three components are sovereign assembly, government, and people themselves. He differentiated from sovereignty and government and said that sovereignty is derived from people who legislate, while government is only involved in the rule of law and implementing the general will. So, sovereignty is will of people, and the government is for implementation of rule of law and implementing. So these are related concepts because it was the will of people and implementing the general will. This is a related concept. The role of a citizen was to act as watchdog and amend the fundamental laws if the state is overreaching. So what is the citizen supposed to do is be a watchdog and ensure that to prevent overreaching. That is the only purpose of a citizen. That is what Rousseau said. He rejects democratic administrations and says that executive government must be entrusted to prince or magistracies. So this government, he said, was ruled by magistracies. These are not elected people. These are rule of magistracies which he did not feel abridged individual rights. In the statement, he means that democracy is ideal only for exceptionally well-informed people who have everyone's best interests at heart and not just themselves. Given his denunciation of democracy, it would be more apt to consider him a champion of republicanism. Republicanism is more on brand for Rousseau than democracy. He promoted the concept of elected aristocracy. So this magistracy is basically an elected aristocracy. This is what the concept is all about. As the balance between hot democracy and cold monarchy, it can be said that Rousseau strove to reconcile the liberty of the individual and the institution of government through a new vision of the contract theory of government. He was also one of the initial proponents of Romanticism. Romanticism. He emphasized on a return to life as it can be seen, felt, and experienced. Seen, felt, and experienced, increasing a reliance on emotion, intuition, and instinct. His autobiography, Confessions, in discussing his flaws openly. Confessions. Open discussion of flaws is what led he questioned reason. He said that drawing inspiration from heart is better than the mind. might be over-corrupted by emphasizing on reason. His ideas are best summarized by the English philosopher G.S. Chesterton, who said that reason is always a kind of brute force, and people who appeal to the head are necessarily men of violence. It can be said that Rousseau's ideas contained the principles of socialism, absolutism, as well as democracy. So, this is what Rousseau stood for. Now, in order to conclude about Rousseau, you can say that Rousseau raises questions of autonomy, equality, and moral foundations of society, leaving an indelible mark on modern thought. This was said by, oh, we have to use white for historiography, Morris Cranston. Now we are going to study about Kant. We are only going to detail Kant today about the other two aspects, so spread of enlightenment in the colonies and then socialism and socialist thought. We are going to cover in the next class, next session, that is. Now, what is Kant? If you have to, again, we are going to start with an introduction of Kant. So, Kant, in introduction, you can cite that he completed the Enlightenment, enforced reason as a way of life and not just attaining knowledge. This is said by Peter Gay. Again, same thing. Peter Gay is the sayer of all of these things, no matter where you what you study, because he is a historian of the Enlightenment, so he says a lot of things. He was an 18th century philosopher and one of the central thinkers of the Enlightenment. One of his biggest contributions was trying to reconcile rationalism, religious belief. So he balanced many different things: rationalism, religious belief, individual freedom, and finally political authority. For Kant, enlightenment was mankind's final coming of age and the emancipation of human consciousness from ignorance and error. So he said that there is ignorance and error, and he said that Enlightenment was going to remove this and implement reason as a way of life. So, what are his major ideas? His major ideas are universal moral law. It is the highest moral law, and it's the duty of state to implement this. Then there's the concept of popular sovereignty. Is the concept that people are the real source of authority as against divine monarchies. For popular sovereignty against divine monarchy. This is an important concept, as divine monarchy, and he opposed direct democracy as majority rule posed a threat. He proposed a combination of democracy, aristocracy, and monarchy. Universal moral law and popular sovereignty are the major concepts of Kant. He said that state is a necessary evil. He wrote about this in Perpetual Peace. It was necessary. The state as an institution was necessary to maintain the peace, and he said that the world must be composed of constitutional republics. Constitutional republics in order to ensure that there is peace. And then he also gave a critique of pure reason. This is the name of a work by Kant, so you can actually cite this. Critique of pure reason. He stressed on the theory of perception and categorical imperative. Categorical imperative, and also against materialism. Alright, this is the basic concept. He welcomed secularism due to alienation from Christianity and also spoke of separation of power. Secularism, separation of power. He also triggered the birth of German nationalism. German nationalism. You do remember that the flag of Germany is black, red, and yellow. So this is how German nationalism began, with Immanuel Kant. And he also said that individualism is an important concept. So what are the concepts he gave? He gave universal moral law, he gave popular sovereignty, state necessary for perpetual peace, secularism due to alienation from Christianity, separation of powers, German nationalism, individualism. Individualism for him meant cultivation of mind. So your mind has to be cultivated if you want to be able to exercise your individual freedom. And then there's the ruler's duty to allow free thinking among his population in order for there to be peace. Now, he believed that he was living in an age that was not enlightened, but was an age of enlightenment. So it can be said, finally, as Lewis Beck, so again, historiographical point, Kant's philosophy reshaped modern thought, reconciling reason with moral duty and freedom with universal ethics. Lewis Beck. Ruler's duty. He between four things he established a balance. It was the political authority, individual freedom, and there was reason, and there was rationalism, and then there was religious belief. So he implemented all of these things. So Kant's philosophy reshaped modern thought, reconciling reason with moral duty and freedom with universal ethics. So this is all for this class. Furthermore, in the next class we are going to read about we have only two concepts left. We have socialism and its rise, and we have spread of enlightenment in the colonies. We are going to do this in the next class. All right, thank you.